Good morning. I was having some mild lighting issues here today, so kind of a strange looking look outside today. So playing with the lighting. Apologize for that. Let's get started. I want to share something with you today that hopefully by the time I get finished with this string, it'll make sense. And it's this. I grew up in a small town, an amazing small town. I absolutely loved it. It was a great place to live. It was a great place to grow up. Lots of friends there, lots of friends from there, lots of great memories from my time when I lived there. Pretty amazing opportunity, pretty amazing place. But it's not the same. It changed. And change always happens because that's normal. Change is supposed to happen. Change takes place over time. Things that you think are always going to remain the same don't. And unfortunately, what we do is we hang on to the nostalgia of that and the nostalgia of that place. And I see people, I still belong to Facebook groups and things like that that are connected with the town that I grew up in. And they're always referring to things that have happened in the past. Man, it was so great remember when we had 3 grocery stores and you could do this and you could do that. Today we don't have a single grocery store in that town. Those days are long since gone. That's one of the reasons why I find the Big John grocery store in Metropolis, Illinois, so fascinating, is because this is somebody who's done it right and lives in a community that supports it. And it's pretty amazing when that happens. But there's a transformation that takes place. And not always is that transformation good. And sometimes there's a nostalgia to the place that doesn't reflect reality. And I think sometimes that enters into our political thinking. It enters into our sales thinking. It enters into our business thinking. Those kinds of things are drastically affected by, they're drastically affected by nostalgia. Sometimes they're drastically affected by our biases. So I'm going to include biases in this conversation, but they're drastically affected by our nostalgia. There was a day, and so I'm going to give you a little bit of history. This is a little bit of my political background. This is a little bit of my record, how I got to here. I've been watching with great fascination this movement of people who've walked away from the Democrat Party. And it's because they grew up kind of like I grew up in my little hometown. That was an amazing little place. They grew up in this environment where there was a promise of tolerance and inclusion and all of these things that, quite honestly, they discovered don't exist anymore. And they were hanging on to the nostalgia of that. Well, I have a similar story, only flip it the other way. 12 years ago, I walked away from the Republican Party because I believed, and I think I believed it accurately. I believed that there was a deception that was going on. I thought we had been sold a lie. I thought that the reasons why we were involved in the Middle East had been falsely represented to us, and there was no accountability for that. And because of that, I could no longer support the party that was pushing that. And I felt like that the tent for that party was really small. And because if this tent was going to get smaller, I was going to be on the outside. So it was time for me to walk away. So I did that. Didn't vote for a Republican. Then along comes the time when John McCain becomes a presidential nominee for the Republican Party. And it's like, is that the best you got? Because that guy's got a terrible track record. I'm not talking about as a person. I'm not talking about as a business person. I'm talking about as a politician. Has a terrible track record. And I walked away from it. Then we have Mitt Romney. Really? Is that the best you got? And then honestly, we had Donald Trump. And I went, can't do that either. So I've spent a long time apart from that. Then I began to look at what's going on in the world today and realize that the tent got a lot bigger. And the other side, the tent was getting smaller. Unfortunately, nostalgia tells you that that's still a big tent. It's not. All you have to do is disagree. All you have to do is tell somebody, I'm from this side, and all of a sudden the people will bombard you with why you're wrong. I made a post over the weekend, and the post was really simple. It said that normally after debates, one side or both sides will immediately hit the campaign trail and begin to talk about their policies and the things that went on in the debate. They communicate to the people in their constituency or in their audience or whatever. And that's true whether it's a national debate or it's a local debate or whatever it is. There's an immediate communication to the world that's going to vote for them. And we've had a debate last Thursday, and there's been no presence of one side. Why is that? And immediately the intolerance came out. Couldn't help it. In fact, I almost deleted that tweet before going live today because I don't like to embarrass people. I don't like to put people on the spot. I don't like to call them out. I don't like to block people. I don't like to unfriend people. That's not in my nature. It's just not in my nature. I don't do that. I've always wanted to surround myself with people, some of whom are going to disagree with me, and I always think that's helpful. But don't tell me that you need to convince me so you can save my life, because I've never heard from you before. This is your very first comment on any post I've made in the 4 years we've been Facebook friends, and now all of a sudden you're there to save my life. I don't buy that extremism. Not today and not ever. What do you know about my life if that's what you're doing? I don't get that. And if you don't do this, the end is there. I'm not buying that. But that's not the kind of people I want to surround myself with. That's called the lunatic fringe. I'm not interested in that. So for the first time ever, I've actually had to exclude some people. Don't want to exclude people, but I because that's not in my nature. I want to have people who I have an article that I just absolutely love. It's called "The Other Side's Not Dumb," and it's about the fact that everybody has a reason for the position that they have. But if you lose it and you start doing that kind of stuff and criticizing absolutely every one of my friends that's in that same camp, then you've lost me along the way. I want to hear both sides. I'm a debate coach. Hearing both sides is important. Understanding where both sides are coming from is important. Then I have a very proud Democrat friend, and he will tell you he's a very proud Democrat friend. And he said it's because one side is practicing the CDC guidelines for social distancing and the other's not. I'll buy that. If that's the line you want to work with, I'll buy it. I doesn't mean I'm going to agree with it, but hey, give me, if that's the best shot that you've got and that's the shot that you want to take, I'm good with that. And I can still love you in the process. Okay. I talked to a man on Friday who said we obviously come from different political persuasions. I don't know how he figured that out. I really don't know how he figured that out from the conversation that we were having because I didn't say anything. He assumed it based upon my zip code, which I find really interesting, that people can make those kind of assumptions based upon your zip code, but he did, and that's okay. And so that began a really interesting conversation, and I will always entertain that other side conversation, always. With that, as long as we can keep the rhetoric out of it, we're not talking about people being stupid and making up stuff and well, so and so lies and no one don't. As long as we can stay out of that, I'll entertain that other side conversation all day long. And so we engaged in this both sides conversation. And I actually sent him a copy of that article, The Other Side's Not Dumb. And you can Google it. It's everywhere. It's a really, really good article. It was an important thing I tried to teach my debates students always, is that the other side's not dumb. You're going to take one side or the other, but you've got to hear arguments on both sides. And it's important to surround yourself with friends that do the same thing. Those have value. And we engaged in a really good conversation, and we parted that conversation in a really, really good place. Because what happened out of this was really important. He admitted that everything that he had looked at was came from one side, and most of everything that I've looked at came from a different perspective. And so what that meant was that the two of us were operating in an echo chamber and trying to communicate. But when I pointed out some things, he goes, I never heard that. Well, that's the reason why last week I talked about, where do you get your information from? And does it come from a place that you can trust? And why I follow a lot of people who are former investigative reporters who have been fired because of their political persuasion. And it was, and he went, I never even thought about that. Now, before you question this person's mentality, he's an attorney. I actually enjoy most conversations with attorneys. I find them to be appealing. I find them to be intellectually challenging. I find that to be beneficial. But he said, obviously, what we have is that I have narrowed my input. And I think that's important. It's important to recognize that. And if we let nostalgia enter into, here's a classic example of somebody who decided that he knew where I was coming from because of my zip code. Does that make sense? Honestly, what that is it's nostalgia. That's nostalgia. It's saying that this is that obviously this comes with a reputation. No, it doesn't. We live in a very, very fluid world. Very fluid. And just because I live in a zip code doesn't make me racist. It doesn't make me misogynist. It doesn't make me any of those other things. It doesn't make me liberal or conservative. It makes me a human who's still alive, who happens to occupy this space. And that's all I'm interested in. So it's been a troubling weekend for me, because I had this great experience on Friday, and then I had to ask the question. I think this is a legitimate question. In America, we deserve to hear from those people who are asking for our vote. And it may be the reason why in many states right now, the thing that's trending the most on Google is, how can I change my vote? Because we sent people out to vote really early, and a lot of information is coming out. You say, well, that's the October surprise. Yeah, it probably is. But guess what? We still need to take a look at it. Don, I agree. And it used to be that we could have those conversations. Don says this: it's hard to have those types of conversation with people these days, but I try. And I do too, but I'm discovering a really interesting thing is that you can't always do that, because they're convinced that they're right and everybody else is wrong. And if you don't agree with them, you're in a cult. What did they just do? They just described the primary characteristic of a cult member when they said they're right and everybody else is wrong. I've always been willing to take a look at the facts, but saying that the taxes are only going to go up on people who make over $400,000 and it's not going to affect the middle class is the dumbest comment I've ever heard, because everybody knows that taxes pass through. If they raise the corporate tax on the tire store and the tire store has to pay 7% more corporate tax, guess who pays that tax? Not the tire store. I can tell you that right now. It gets passed to me, the consumer, who we seem to be so concerned about people sitting around their table trying to figure out whether they can replace bald tires or not, and saying we're going to tax the businesses and not you. Phew. I'm sorry that went right over your head. I realize I come from a very slanted position. I lobbied at one time for the Eastern Kansas Gas and Oil Association. So I had to look at that and listen. Growing up, I was an environmentalist. I was a hippie. I was opposed to all of those things. I had to look at this at where that was coming from and take another perspective. And it forced me to examine all of that stuff that I struggled with. Yeah, Don, there was a reason for those early votes. Let's get these people in because there's a clock ticking. Somebody might find out. It's bad. I get my news sources from multiple places, including outside of the country, and it's bad. It's really bad. Yeah, exactly. Don's given the best illustration that there is. Why did the rent go up? All we did was we raised property taxes. It's the pass through. If you don't understand pass through taxes, work with me. One of these days, I'll show you the well-traveled dollar, and you'll get it. I used to teach this to my high school students. We called it the well-traveled dollar. We'd stick a dollar up on the board, and we talk about how many hands it has to go through before it gets right back to the people who gave it. And that dollar gets down to nothing. Nothing. The property taxes is exactly the same thing flipped. We're going to tax you, and then what you do is you raise the rent because you got taxed more. You say, well, we need to look into that. We need to stop that from happening. Yes, and the moment you do that, you have socialism, communism, and not capitalism. It's just the way it works. There's any other way. You can't deny that. So now I'm going to wrap this up with this because this is way longer than I intended to be. But I want you to see this whole nostalgia thing and this thing of this party represents this and this party represents this is BS. Those parties do not represent anything other than their best interest. Their best interest, not yours. So what has to happen is we've thrown a disruptor in the mix. And that disruptor who got thrown into the mix has been the attack of everything. Like it or not, it's true. I didn't vote for Trump in the last election. I will in this one for two reasons. Number one, he did do what he said he was going to do. He did. You can disagree with that all you want to. In fact, I have a good friend who sent me a video or posted a video that said, look, Trump's taking money out of the offering plate. I watched the video 1,000 times. Trump's not taking money out of the offering plate. He's putting money in it. You see what you want to see. That's what you did. You see what you want to see. Second reason, he did do what he said he was going to do. As much as was humanly possible, he did what he said he was going to do. And I see things happening in places that I never thought I would ever see. Historically black colleges being funded for 10 years out rather than every year having to come back and beg. That's huge. I don't care what you say, that's huge. And lots more. And I could go on and on and on. This nonsense that he wants to take people with pre-existing conditions. I'm one of those, by the way. So understand I'm not throwing somebody else under the bus. That's me. But listen, if Obamacare could cover people with pre-existing conditions, anything that follows it could do exactly the same thing. Barack Obama was not the wizard that made everything happen. And nobody can do it better. I disagree with that. And certainly not babbling Biden cannot do that. Cannot do that. Larry's identified the minimum wage, another one of those pass-through things. So the Trump tax breaks did help. They did help. I saw the difference. Other people saw the difference. They did make a difference to middle-class people. And if you think that you're just going to throw this on the top and it's not going to trickle down, I got news for you. I've never worked for anybody, ever worked for anybody who made less money than me. Haven't. Not my entire life. That's how it works. People up here pay people down here. And to be honest with you, people down here are generous and help the people who are down here. That's how it works. That is exactly how it works. Is it a perfect system? Absolutely not. But it does work. And I know that because, and I'm going to end with this one because I would never find an ending if I don't. There's certain things that just outrage me. And when I saw the 545 kids at the border who have been separated from their parents, I was outraged. I was absolutely outraged. How in the world could that happen? So I investigated. 545 kids without parents at the border. 485 of those parents have been found not at the border, back in their country of origin. You know what that means? They sent them with somebody. Call them a coyote, call them whatever you want. Doesn't really make any difference. They sent them with somebody. And let me prove something to you. I'll take one. If their parents don't want them back, send them to me. I'll take them. Taken before, take again. Can't promise I'll get them through high school, but I'll take them again. You have to understand that 485 of the 545 parents said, no, don't send them back. I don't want them. And I'm outraged by that. So I looked to see how many parents in America abandoned their kids. Because if we have an outrage about them being abandoned at the border, we ought to have an outrage about them being abandoned in this county. Over 7,000 children are abandoned by their parents every year in the United States. Over 800,000 go missing somehow. Where's the outrage about that? Don't tell me who's the party of people who care. Because parties don't care. People do. People do. You have to keep that in mind. People do. We're going to have a transfer of power, whether we like it or not. It's either going to get transferred from the first term to the second, or it's going to get transferred from the first term to somebody else. But don't think the government's going to do it for you. You have to make a difference. People up here pay the people down here, and the people down here are generous to the people who are here. That's how it works. Not complicated. Not a complicated system. But if you think the government's going to take care of everybody, you're not just wrong. You're dead wrong. Thank you for allowing me to ramble about this morning. Included way more than I intended to. But I'm going to wrap it up. And thank you. Have a wonderful, wonderful week. We have a countdown to an election. And an important election at that.